Is 5-MeO DMT objectively more powerful, more healing, and just overall a more useful experience than normal DMT? Well, a very prominent figure in the psychedelic community has put that very case forward this week, so I wanted to chime in with my opinion on it. Hello my fellow psychonauts. It feels like absolutely ages since I made a video because I've been doing all this traveling due to my real life job, but now I'm back. Often it takes a while to kind of get back into the flow of doing YouTube, especially when you've taken a break like I have. But I saw some stuff online that kind of really got my gears turning and made me want to sort of chime in and be part of the discussion. And that thing was a post by Martin Ball. Now, Martin Ball is no stranger to this channel. He's been on here a few times. And Martin is a big advocate of 5-MeO DMT. In fact, he's in the process of writing a book all about 5-MeO DMT. And he posted an excerpt of that onto his Facebook account this week for people to sort of read and comment. And unsurprisingly, this was a very sort of pro 5-MeO DMT thing, and he was basically putting forth the case that it's just a much better, in every way, psychedelic experience than something like normal, regular DMT, if you could ever apply something like the terms normal or regular to something extraordinary like DMT. Now, most of what Martin posted I would completely agree with, and he does have a vast amount of experience with 5-MeO DMT as a substance and the non-dual states that come with it. But there was some stuff he talked about that I would like to challenge and offer a different perspective into. So this isn't my attempt to start some sort of online fisticuffs with Martin. I've got a lot of respect for what he does, but I think one of the greatest sort of compliments that one content creator can give to another is not just to sort of absorb their ideas, but to actually challenge back and have a discussion about them. So that's what I'm looking to do here. So let's get into it. So the first part I want to look at deals with the topic of which substance is chemically stronger. DMT, for one, is far weaker in the sense that you need to use 10 times more molecule for a full experience than you do of 5-MeO DMT. For example, a 10 mg experience of 5-MeO DMT is more potent than 100 mg of DMT. DMT is also much shorter acting, where a full DMT experience lasts 5 to 15 minutes compared to a full 5-MeO DMT experience of 10 to 40 minutes. So straight away there is nothing I would completely disagree with, and I think what he says is entirely accurate. But I think doing this kind of milligrams versus milligrams comparison is completely useless. And I talked a little bit about this in my video of the psychedelic pissing contest, in this as though some kind of grammage equals some sort of better experience. I think if we were going to boil everything down to the actual physical amount of things you take versus the experience it generates, then I think ultimately Salvia Divinorum would win out here, because that requires a minuscule amount to create some of the most bonkers experiences ever. So yeah, it's not a huge sticking point for me, but I really do think we should get away from this idea of most powerful. Anything is powerful if you take it in a large enough quantity. And when you're dealing with substances like these, where the amounts are so tiny anyway, does it really matter? The difference between 100 milligrams is still nothing compared to, say, 20 milligrams. We're talking about tiny amounts, so I just think this is a moot point to make. The next point is on describing the DMT experience. Visually, DMT is simply over the top, and in that respect, we can safely say that it's about the most psychedelic of all the psychedelics out there. Visually, it's extraordinarily colourful, engrossing, highly geometric and fractal, and certainly very infinite. It's crazy, it's beautiful, it's terribly complex, it's engrossing and captivating. But it preserves and augments the ego, and then it's gone. So I think Martin does a perfectly good job here of describing the DMT experience. Yes, it's got all this geometry, it's got all these visual fireworks, it's just this extraordinary, bombastic experience. And I think that the bit I want to kind of zero in on is these last two statements around it preserving and augmenting the ego, and then it's gone. So first, let's look at the ego part. I think that within the psychedelic community, the ego is just one of the most over-demonized and sort of over-fetishized sort of, objects that there is within the psyche. This idea of ego death is seen as this kind of be-all and end-all of sort of psychedelic experience, to the point where, as I've covered in previous videos, I'm not even sure that people fully understand what it is that they're reaching for here. I've heard so many people say that they want to kill their ego without clearly having a full understanding of what their ego even is. As I mentioned, I've covered this in a previous video all about ego death, so I'll put a link to that up there somewhere. But I'll just sort of briefly expand on that now, this idea of that the ego being present is a bad thing. I don't think it is at all. In fact, I think the ego is an essential and ever-present part of our human experience. And this idea that we can kill the ego and somehow be better for it is complete sort of bullshit, in my opinion. We are all living with our ego. And I think in often cases what I see with people who are sort of having problems with their life, what they need is not an ego death, it's actually an ego strengthening. You know, as with everything, there's a balance to be found here. So this idea of like killing the ego will make, you know, into some sort of enlightened super being or make things better, I think is not particularly accurate, or at least not in the way that a lot of people imagine that it is. I think what Martin is getting at here is that with the 5-MeO DMT experience, yes, that the ego does completely drop away. You go into this kind of this non-dual state where there is only one. It feels like there is only one thing in the entire universe, and it is, to even say you are it is you, it is all just one. That is, I think, a very important and a very useful experience to have. But it is not the totality of experience which a lot of the kind of non-dual practitioners will make out that it is. It is one aspect, it is one frame which I think is useful way of kind of viewing your life and viewing, you know, your humanity, because it gives you this just radically different way of looking at yourself. But you can't sort of live in that state. If you know, show me a person who says they are living 24/7 in a non-dual state, and I will show you a person who is completely full of shit. So while it's a useful slice of your kind of human experience to have it, it's not the be all and end all. Now, likewise, I think what Martin says here is accurate in that DMT does preserve the ego. This is kind of one of the most kind of astonishing things about it, is that as you go through this bombastic experience, you feel very much present. This is why it has this feeling of being more realer than real. And what's happening is that you are going on a sort of a narrative experience. You are being told a story, and whether that story is coming from, you know, whatever your belief is, if it's coming from aliens or hyperdimensional portals or coming from within your own psyche. Either way, there is a narrative going on, and you are sort of interpreting it and adding meaning to it and sort of bringing it back to yourself. Now, I would argue that that storytelling, that narrative that is happening, is just as, if not more important than this complete lack of narrative which you get from 5-MeO DMT. 5-MeO DMT collapses everything down into nothingness, into isness, into oneness. Whereas the DMT journey is this trip through meaning and sort of, you know, things beyond imagination. Now, we as human beings, we are storytelling creatures. This is how we live our lives. This is what I'm doing now. I'm telling the story. Everything I did today is part of a story which I'm weaving in real time, on the spot, and telling to myself and incorporating things that are happening around me, experiences that are happening to me, things that I feel. It all becomes part of this meaning. And that is, for the vast majority of us, in fact, I would argue probably for everybody, that is where we spend the vast majority of our time. So I think this exercising this muscle of going through this narrative process, extracting this meaning, integrating it, I think is just as valuable, if not more, because it's something that we use day in, day out, you know, through our entire waking lives. I think that's just as valuable as the non-dual experience. Now, I come from more the sort of the perspective that with these experiences, with these psychedelics, really what we're looking at is many different ways of viewing our human experience, ways of sort of twisting the prism and exposing a new aspect. So to put all the emphasis on one particular facet of it, be it the non-dual experience, be it the sort of, you know, the bombastic psychedelic narrative, even if we take something very human and said something like, if I wanted to spend my entire time having an orgasm, if I was having a 24/7 orgasm, I think it somewhat misses a point. The point, I think, is balance through all these things. One of these things is not better than the other. And I think the more different sort of perspectives that we can have upon, you know, our existence as a human being, the better, in my humble opinion. The last bit I just want to come to here is this final line from "and then it's gone." I would challenge that this is completely false. The DMT experience is not gone. In fact, the fact that I made a YouTube channel where I come and relay these experiences and sort of interpret them afterwards, I spend weeks and weeks, meditating upon these experiences, integrating these experiences. The idea that they're just gone just because the experience itself is a 5-minute experience, I think is kind of nonsense. So I would really push back on Martin to sort of rethink that. The DMT experience, although the moment of it in itself is this very quick, fleeting moment, the impact it has is incredibly significant. I mean, you can see this just from, particularly when you see people on ayahuasca retreats and they come back and they have these long-lasting healing effects. It's not just some fleeting fart of fireworks that just disappears. It can have long-lasting, very profound effects. So yeah, I would really challenge back this idea that DMT is just some sort of fun, fanciful thing, whereas 5-MeO DMT is like the shit, and that's where it happens. So this next section covers the nuts and bolts of DMT versus 5-MeO DMT. With DMT, it's most common for people to experience themselves as dying and then traveling out to some other place, which might be rationalized as some kind of afterlife. However, with 5-MeO DMT, people experience themselves as dying, and then as the ego falls away and dissolves, suddenly they are the universal consciousness and being that is everyone and everything. Again, I think Martin's kind of right here, but I would also push back. You can have that experience on DMT or any other psychedelic, again, depending how deep you go into the experience. In other words, people tend to travel out on DMT, whereas with 5-MeO DMT, they tend to go to the center of all existence and being, and in that state, recognize the fundamental nature of reality as being identical with themselves without separation. Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree. That is the non-dual experience that you get from 5-MeO DMT, and I think Martin describes it very accurately, and it is extremely useful, extremely profound. I'm not going to argue at all that 5-MeO DMT is just an incredibly unique experience. I described it as a magnificent experience, so no argument there. However, if you want to get to the very heart of all being and all of reality and truly know yourself at the deepest and most intimate level, and also have the opportunity to process and release all your egoic trauma and residue either on the way up or back down, then you'd never choose DMT or the 5-MeO DMT. In this matter, one is clearly superior to the other. They are not comparable and they are not interchangeable. And for those few who still proclaim that DMT is more powerful than 5-MeO DMT, I'm sorry, but I think you're profoundly mistaken. As far as I'm concerned, there is no real debate or question here. So yeah, this is where I would completely disagree with Martin, and I think he's vastly overlooking the power and profundity of this narrative-driven experience, again, in relation to ourselves as narrative-driven beings. So yeah, I mean, you can completely have one of the most powerful healing experiences or the most powerful psychonaut exploration experiences from realizing your sort of, your lineage, spanning back through time, going into the future, from realizing, having these very cosmic visions of the universe and knowing your place within it. This is profound stuff. It changed me. It was profound to my life, and I've seen many people have very similar experiences. So to kind of throw this away and say, no, actually, that's not actually particularly useful, but this experience of oneness, this experience of everything just going kind of white and collapsing down into this one singular experience, which again is in itself completely profound, completely, awe-inspiring. But it's, in my opinion, one in no way trumps the other. There are so many different experiences to be had within the sort of psychedelic realm that, it's one of the things that keeps me coming back, that you can just be blown away by how different these things are. I think the point that I'm making here is that, contrary to what Martin says, there is a real debate and there is a question here. What becomes clear from the non-dual perspective is that all dualistic experiences wherein the ego is preserved are lesser order experiences and not as fundamentally true as the sense of unitary being discovered in non-duality. To put it bluntly, DMT seems more of a show and projection that is experienced by the often confused and odd ego, whereas 5-MeO DMT presents as a fundamental nature of being and reality. So yeah, this feels a little bit like my experience is better than your experience. And again, I would disagree with it. I mean, sure, DMT is definitely more of a show. It is this narrative that I keep banging on about. But to say that it's not kind of like a true part of our experience, again, where I made this case around our lives as human beings, is this narrative-driven thing, it just seems to me completely bizarre that we would just sort of reject that and say, no, 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 it's actually all here. And I guess this comes from my personal, stance on this, is that I see myself as a conscious system that is having the experience of being a human being. And I want to experience everything that a human being has. Whatever I am, whether there is something that is going to survive this meat body after death, while I'm here, and I'm definitely here as far as I can tell, it feels like I'm here, I want to get the best out of it. And so I'm going to do all those human things. I'm going to sort of make friends, I'm going to have sex, I'm going to take drugs, I'm going to do lots of stupid stuff I regret. I'm going to have the best human experience I can possibly have. And that is not the non-dual experience. The non-dual experience is amazing, absolutely amazing, but that's not where we live our lives as human beings. So the next part covers mystical experiences. Furthermore, in scientific studies done on psychedelics, it has been found that the mystical experience tends to have the most therapeutic benefits for patients. Mystical can be defined in various ways, but in general, mystical is tended to mean a sense of being in the presence of God, of feeling unconditional love, of transcending all space and time, a sense of union with the divine, or, as articulated through non-duality, a sense of being one with all of reality and as being identical with the universal consciousness. Hands down, 5-MeO DMT is by far the most mystical of any psychedelic substance. Now, this is going to come down to how you define this mystical experience, but I would actually completely disagree with Martin here. For me, the mystical experience is a narrative-driven experience. And I think this ties into certainly a lot of the reports that I've read from other psychonauts who have these mystical experiences. Also, if you read a lot of the scientific literature, what's being done into mystical experiences, they don't tend to fit with this sort of everything collapsed down into one non-dual experience. I think the non-dual experience, I think that the label of it of a non-dual experience is absolutely correct for what it is. A mystical experience has this feeling of sort of being taken on a journey. There is a narrative to it. You are present for it. There is a sort of a story that is being told to it. That's why it's mystical. People talk about meeting sort of dead people, meeting their ancestors, being taken to sort of a sacred space. So I would disagree here with what Martin says, that the mystical experience is the non-dual experience. I think these are two completely different things. Again, both equally profound, and as with all psychedelics, there can be some crossover here. So you can have a non-dual experience that leads into a mystical experience or vice versa. But yeah, I don't think that the mystical experience is exclusively the non-dual experience. In fact, I would say none of my sort of non-dual experiences had that same feel to it that the narrative-driven mystical experiences did. I remember some excerpt, I think it's from Michael Pollan's book, where they were talking about trying to induce these mystical experiences within a laboratory sort of setting or a clinical setting. And, the mystical experiences always had the character of, like meeting a dead ancestor, confronting some kind of trauma, and being told the story of this trauma and why it was sort of, important and why it needed to sort of be unpacked. Whereas I don't necessarily get that within the non-dual experience. So yeah, I think it's just worth, I'll just say I'll disagree with Martin on that one, that the non-dual experience or the 5-MeO experience is more mystical than, say, something like DMT. So to wrap this up, there is a line that Martin uses, which I think sort of engrosses all this really well. What he says is that we as human beings are comprised of this, that, and nothing. And I would completely agree. And what I think 5-MeO deals with particularly well is the nothing part. But it doesn't really deal with the this or the that. And as we can see from this and that, that's more than the nothing part. The nothing is an important aspect of who we are, of who we will become, of where we came from, but it's not the totality of it. And what I would like to see is that we stop fetishizing certain aspects of these substances, of our own experience, like the ego, and instead just embrace a more holistic approach to our experience as a human being. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thanks to everyone who took the time to watch this, and a special shout out to all my patrons for supporting the channel. I also just want to give a huge, big, special thank you to James W. Jessop from the channel Adventures Through the Mind, who sent me this rather fetching t-shirt, which I've been wearing throughout this video. And I just want to give send out some special positive vibes to James because he was recently involved in a car accident. James is a great guy. I'm a big fan of his channel. He's actually been on my channel a couple of times and I've always really enjoyed talking with him. So James, I hope you're recovering well from your accident that you had. And if I believed in sending out cosmic healing positive vibes to you across to Canada, then I would be sending them, but I don't. So you just have to take this as some sort of gesture of goodwill. But yeah, mate, I hope you feel better soon. And to all the rest of you, again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Adeptus Psychonautica.